So, okay, we have this information. We're just going to set it aside, and we're just gonna be, because there's really nothing we can do in this moment. And then around that time, you're also looking for those poops, right? Like the whole thing about new parents, people who aren't parents, right? They haven't realized that we talk about poop all the time, right? You do that in the NICU too. And he had a few, and then like he really wasn't like passing anymore. And we're like, what's going on? What's going on? And eventually we learned that he had some perforation in his small intestine. I guess what his intestine was doing, it was like almost trying to like compensate for it. So it was like kind of folding over and trying to reabsorb and all this stuff. So when he ended up having a surgery, the surgeon was sharing with us that like they had to kind of go in and he had to do all this additional stuff because they couldn't find a blockage. It was like this whole like, this doesn't make any sense. And that's when they finally realized that it was like the intestine was like almost hiding. It was the weirdest thing.
Wow.
One of the things that I remember, like I kind of joked about it later on, but early on we were told like, babies at that age, it's typically head or gut. And I was like, Cooper, I feel like he saw the buffet menu and said, I will take one of everything, right? Like, so he wanted to visit every single, specialty in the hospital. He needed all the visitors. He loved visitors. He absolutely loved visitors. But yeah, he had ended up having a surgery for the perforated bowel. And then his recovery from that surgery was not good. So, and we were told that like, he may have a bad, day or so afterwards because like there's just a lot of trauma he experienced in the surgery. But we didn't necessarily know what that meant. And I remember we came in the next morning. That was on a Friday, I believe, and we came in Saturday morning. And one of our primary nurses, we walk in, she's in there with a few other people, and they're just actively working on him. And the alarms are going off as they always are, and it's a horrible sound. But she just had this look on her face that just said everything. Like, this isn't good. And then she was like, she's like, I've been here since I started. Like, I haven't left his bedside. Like, it's just not good. He ended up having bedside surgery because what was happening was essentially his body was getting really inflamed in response to the surgery. And so he was having all these different sort of stress responses. So he ended up having surgery again. And this time it was bedside surgery. So he was saying we all had to leave. That was a crazy thing because this was probably about a month into, or almost a month into his life. And his room became like, that was like our sanctuary. It was like our home away from home. We had all these signs. The nurses had made signs. Family had made signs. We had all these amazing things there. And all of a sudden it was like everything was getting wheeled out, right? So I always said that the NICU reminds you it's an ICU when you need to be reminded it's an ICU, because it's so easy to feel like this is comfortable and this is great and we're friends with everyone and all these things, and as you should. But you forget that like this is a space for medically fragile, high need individuals. And I remember we had, it might have been a fellow who was kind of giving us a little upbrief about what was going to happen. And she essentially was saying, they're going to do blah, 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 blah. And we aren't sure if the tissue is conducive for life. And I remember she like kind of walked away. And it was very medical. It was very matter of fact. It was very kind of to the point. And I remember Haley saying, like, just looking at me and saying, what did she mean by that? And I said, she means exactly what you think she meant. And, later on, we kind of just reflected on like, we get it, but like, that was also like a really hard, like in your face thing to say. No malintent behind that, but it was our first real moment where we felt like death was at the door. Like that was our first real, we didn't really have any scares behind, we had news about, about brain bleeds. He had been intubated and then he quickly moved off and was like on NIPPV. And so in our mind, we were like, okay, like we're doing the thing. Even the first surgery wasn't super scary for us. Like I've had like 7 surgeries. So in my mind, I'm like, it's just a surgery, whatever. All of a sudden now we're in like an emergency space, right? Emergency surgery. And we're waiting now down the hall. And it was like the longest 30 minutes. And he was fine, but they ended up doing a silo just to give his gut some breathing room because he had an ostomy that was built in from the first surgery. They siloed him. And then a few days later, they went back in and like created a new ostomy, which ironically, as like a high schooler, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor and all this stuff or whatever. And then I was like, why do I need to take physics? It was a whole nother story. But and then all of a sudden I'm like, here we are, and like now I'm like seeing his intestine, because then all of a sudden eventually the ostomy started to like kind of let loose what was like suturing down as he was growing, and this is just what it is, and we love him for what it is. But yeah, so then he had that, and so by that point we're now we're TPN. Obviously his digestion wasn't doing it, but eventually it was like, okay, and then let's try to like reintroduce. It was so we were living in that space, and then about 2 months into his life, it was Good Friday. And we remember this because we went to a baseball game, and it was like the first time that like we kind of like did something fun. Because I remember they were like, oh, go to the mountains, and we're like, no, we're not, like we're not leaving, right? So we were at a baseball game, and then we went home, and Haley had a rule with the hospital that she said, don't ever call me from the hospital phone. That's going to mean something bad. So like if we ever got a phone call that someone called us like on a cell phone or something like that, she just knew like if I got this number could only be for bad reasons. So, and normally she was the primary person who they would call. And I remember this that night, and Haley, she had gone to bed, and I was still up. And then I have this phone call. This like phone number is calling me. I'm like, who's? And it's like 11:30 at night, and it's one of the PAs, and she's like sharing with us that Cooper was starting to have seizures, and he was having seizures, and they're not stopping. So he was like in a level 3 NICU. They called the flight team for the level 4 NICU in the area, because the neurologist who they would have had come in and do the EEG, ironically, he was on vacation. He was the only neurologist there. So like there was no one there to do it. They needed to do this to see what's going on. They were calling the flight team. So like, you need to come now because he's going. And so I wake up Haley. And so all of a sudden we're in this new space of what does this mean? And in our mind, we kind of always knew the level 4 hospital meant something. If he could handle level 3, could pretty much do it all. Level 4, there was a few things more that they could do. If we're going there for a reason. And we were going there for a reason. And so we showed up to the hospital, and the flight team was already there. We're experiencing all this new equipment, all this another element of what the NICU experience could be. And everything in the room was down. The room was completely, it was like a generic room again, because they knew we all had to leave. So, and we love that NICU team that was there. We're still very close with many of them. They were packing it all up for us so we could take it to the next one. But you right. Walk into what was your home, and now it's just a room.
Just like a significant representation of what's happening.
We're done here. Yeah, there was a physical manifest. We were done here. We weren't coming back. And so now we're driving in, it's like midnight, and we're driving to the hospital following the ambulance. And now we're in a new hospital. We don't know anyone. You don't know where you're going. I mean, and of course, when you're following them, they're taking you the back way, right? The staff way. Right. So how do I get out of here when I'm, all these things. And it was another big aha for us that like, we're new at this. Thought we knew it all, we thought we knew it all, and all of a sudden now we're new. Like, we don't know where he's going to be. We don't know where the bathroom is. Like, all of these things. We don't know these people's names. We don't know, do we like them? Just all of these things. And so when we were there, and then they monitor him for 24 hours, maybe, I don't think it was 48 hours, but about at least 24 hours. And that's when they shared with us that outside of his seizure activity, the brain activity wasn't super active. So the only time they were seeing really active brain activity was during the seizures, and it kind of was pretty mellow from that. But we needed to do an MRI to kind of determine these things or whatever. And at this point, I was kind of trying to hold it together. Haley was definitely having a lot more of like an emotional response to that, where this was probably the first time that we really kind of started not like arguing with each other, but we were starting to get more intense with each other a little bit, right? Because we were navigating these feelings throughout this whole process. We were a united front. We definitely had this team kind of aspect to it, but all of a sudden kind of the optimism was slowly fading away, and we were almost kind of losing our footing in the space. And I remember saying to Haley, if you can't go to the hospital and be good for Cooper, I don't want you going to the hospital. Like, I need you to go home. I am going to go because I need to go. He just doesn't need this negativity in that room. So if you need to take the time to take care of yourself, go do that. And she did. And then I remember I was there and I got asked by a fellow on the neurology team, when's your wife coming in? I was like, I don't know, tomorrow or this afternoon, something like that. Okay, well, let us know when she's here. All right, well, that was a weird question. And so, so I told Haley, I think I got home for lunch. I told her, and she's all like, well, that's not good news. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, if they're not wanting to tell you something by yourself, that's probably not good news. And I was like, no, that can't be the case. And sure enough, it was the case. So then finally, when we were there, that's when this whole new team kind of ascended in, and we felt so bad because these fellows are having to tell us the worst news ever, right? They're attendees there, but it's a learning opportunity for them. And what they were showing us was essentially the images of his ventricles were in relation to the gray matter was kind of inverse of what you would typically see of like a cross section of the brain. So they were way enlarged, and the amount of gray matter they had was a lot less. And so, they're telling us, obviously we can't predict the future. We don't know what this means, but we can tell you that often when we see this type of thing, this is what it could mean, right? And that he could be in the hospital a lot, that he may never talk, may never eat on his own, may never breathe on his own, will probably never walk, like all of these things. And going back to the idea that like Haley and I are always kind of flipping, right? So earlier it was like, you need to be home if you, whatever. Haley knew right away what she wanted the plan of kind of action to be, for Cooper and what quality of life would look like for him. I was all of a sudden in the space of denial. And I'm like, well, can I get a second opinion? Like, all these things. What does this look like? Because for me, yeah, his head was bigger than it needed to be. But like, okay, there's ways that we could fix that. And, respiratory was never really an issue. And GI tract is pretty much under control. We're just going to have to reverse the ostomy at some point. Like in my mind, we're good to go. I remember I kind of shared that. And it was the first time we had ever heard the word life support be used to reference what he's been on. Because I mentioned something about, I think at this point he was CPAP. And I was like, like he's doing his thing. Like, we keep going better. And they were like, but he's actually never been off the machine. So he's always had an external reminder of breathe.
Right.
And then, we had the palliative nurse had shared with us that, he's doing what he needs to be doing right now. He's a baby. He's being a baby. But there's a good possibility he may never get out of that stage. And so that's when we had to have some really hard conversations. And we had to talk to our parents, and we talked to priests at home. And he's amazing. And he was super concerned because I've never had to like counsel anyone in this space before. He ended up calling the retired cardinal of our archdiocese to this whole thing. And at the end of the day, we knew that when we're talking about quality of life and what Cooper's life, what we wanted it to be, like, we didn't want him to suffer. And he had been pricked and prodded and cut open and all these things so much that for us to continue that on simply because we just want to hold on to him, kind of be with him, not knowing what that could look like, we never wanted him to suffer. And so that's when we shifted to palliative care, and a whole nother layer of what a NICU experience can be. It often is not, but we saw some of the greatest angels in that space too. And some of our greatest memories come out of that time, because our whole mindset had to shift, right? From sort of what does his recovery look like to how do we just squeeze every ounce of family time out of him. And we were super blessed with the team because we had a child life specialist come in, and it was doing all these different prints and things. And she had this book. They had this really cool wood cutting machine thing. And she's like, well, let me know what you want. And I was like, well, can we have it all? And she's like, sure. So we got like a picture frame with stuff on it and like this cube thing. And they had this Build-A-Bear thing where they recorded his heartbeat and they put it in the bear. And they had a partnership with a group called Beads of Courage. And so they had gone through his file and they gave us all the different beads to kind of indicate all the different things that he had experienced up to that point in the NICU. So we just started having all of these sort of memories and symbols that we didn't necessarily have before. And, we continued to hold him. I mean, that was, like I said, that was our favorite thing to do. I mean, I would say probably 80% of our time in the NICU, one of us was holding him. And I then kind of I said, you're going to listen to music from all over the world. And so we just started playing music everywhere and just talking with him. And one of the things, they had asked us was, is there sort of like a big wish that you like, what is something you really want to have? And Haley had said, she's like, if I can, I would love to take him outside. He's never been outside. And they're like, okay, well, we'll have to see because we've never done that.